Hello, my name is Guðrún Hildur Rosenkjær and I'm a tailor and historian. Since completing my training as a tailor and dressmaker in 1997, I have been working with traditional costumes or Þjóðbúningar. Today, I run the company Annríki Þjóðbúningar og skart together with my husband Ásmundur Kristjánsson, who is mechanic and goldsmith. We make Þjóðbúningar and ornament by order and give courses in making them. My interest in exploring the history of costumes and the people who created them awakened early. In 2008, I began studying history at the University of Iceland, focusing on the clothing and fashion of previous centuries. The lives of people have naturally intertwined with these studies, and gradually I have become acquainted with them through various sources. It all started in 1999 when I went to London to examine an Icelandic traditional costume, Þjóðbúningur, that is preserved there. The costume was sold to the English nobleman William Jackson Hooker in 1809 and later to the Victoria and Albert Museum. The costume is beautifully decorated with embroidery and jewelry, and it has a unique story. When the ship on which Hooker sailed to England sank near Reykjavík, Icelanders believed that the costume was lost. However, it was not the case. The costume had been placed in a chest that survived along with all the passengers. The costume was sewn around 1800 by an Icelandic seamstress named Guðrún Skúladóttir as a wedding dress for Ragnheiður Ólafsdóttir, the daughter of the highest official in the country, Governor Ólafur Stephensen. I was immediately determined to recreate the costume but wanted to learn more about the woman who made it. Thanks to my knowledge of history and clothing, I have been able to do so, and I sometimes say that the collaboration between Guðrún and I began there in London. Guðrún Skúladóttir was born on January 17, 1740. She was one of the 7 children of Skúli Magnússon, the sheriff, and his wife, Steinunn Björnsdóttir. They lived in a grand residence in Viðey, a small island near Reykjavík. At that time in Iceland, households were responsible for the education of children, teaching them all the main farm and household chores. Sources suggest that Guðrún was considered well educated in handicrafts as well as academics. She read both Danish and German, was well read in literature, and studied midwifery. Guðrún married Jón Snorrason, a district commissioner, in 1760. Her father gave them a grand wedding at Viðey, and as a dowry she got clothes and jewelry appropriate for her status. But she also got 2 shares in his new business, Innréttingar, the only woman shareholder. Guðrún and Jón lived in Skagafjörður in the north of Iceland. Numerous letters from her have been preserved, describing the spirit of the time as well as the ups and downs in her life that was not always easy. Jón was a drinker and difficult to live with. Guðrún had several miscarriages and wanted to leave him, as she wrote to her father, but she became a widow in 1771 at the age of 31 without children. After difficult years in Skagafjörður, Guðrún moved back to Viðey in 1783. There she thrived among family and friends and met visitors from foreign countries. Guðrún had a workshop there that she called Annríki, which means busyness, and felt joy and happiness in her craftsmanship. She had income from selling her product, but she also received a widow's pension. Guðrún passed away on June 20, 1816. In Viðey, Guðrún worked as an independent craftswoman who became known for the great work she accomplished there in these years. As well as the costume in London, several artifacts made by her have been preserved. Among them are two beautifully adorned skirts with floral patterns, one that she made for the bishop's wife in 1798 and another one that she owned herself. By looking at those artifacts, it becomes obvious why Icelanders commemorated her with the honorary title Mother of the Flowers. When William Jackson Hooker visited Viðey, he was enchanted by the exquisite costumes shown by Guðrún. In his book Travels in Iceland 1809, he describes the costumes in some details. He does not mention the first layer of undergarments made of linen or wool, such as shirt and one or more layers of petticoats. These were necessities such as the pocket tied around the waist. He begins describing the next layer of undergarments. The bodice, upphlutur, is made of green velvet embellished with golden ribbons. 5 pairs of golden clasps are on the front, each about the size of half a British crown coin. Hanging from the bodice is a green petticoat made of fine wool fabric. On top of that is a blue wool skirt with red edging, embroidered with beautifully colored floral patterns and an apron with same decoration. There are 3 golden buttons attached to the waistband that hang over the belt made of velvet with golden ornament. A black velvet jacket is worn over the bodice. The seams on the back are adorned with golden ribbons. The front is adorned with golden embroidery. A flat and stiff collar decorated with golden embroidery is attached to the neckline. Golden cufflinks hang from the sleeves end. The headdress was the piece that amazed the travelers most. It starts with linen cap to bind up the hair, with several pieces of linen cloth woven around the head and fastened with pins. The headdress could be constructed as high as the fashion commanded. Hooker drew a picture and described it in that way. The headdress called faldur reaches 18 thumbs above the head and resembles somewhat of a feather of an ostrich, but unfortunately it is nowhere near as grandeur. In addition, Hooker mentions a neckpiece with a locket and socks and sheepskin shoes. With the Þjóðbúningar in London is also a cassock decorated with pair of shields with the initials SMD and 23 golden pairs of clasps and loops. In the year 2000, I began to reconstruct this costume. Stitch by stitch, hour by hour, the work has been going on for 20 years. Ásmundur has crafted the ornament and today the costume is complete. Countless hours of work have been invested which cannot be quantified. The costume is incredibly beautiful and testifies our ancestors' craftsmanship and skills. It is no wonder that Hooker desired to bring such a splendid souvenir home, but what Guðrún, Mother of the Flowers, thought of the sale of her masterpiece remains unknown. When considering all the diverse decorations and fine fabrics in this exceptional dress, you wonder where the materials and influences came from. Did women have leisure time for fine embroidery while there was so much work to be done producing clothes for the household and for export? All Icelanders needed clothes, but how did they dress every day? There are diverse written sources available that can be used when examining clothing and fashion from the 18th century. Travel books written by foreign travelers provide varied and interesting sources. In their travels in Iceland, they observed the lifestyle of the locals. They found a lot of things peculiar, especially the women's costumes. Drawings made by these travelers are invaluable, such as this one from Mackenzie's expedition in 1810. On the left, there is a woman in a traditional Icelandic Þjóðbúningar with a headdress krókfaldur, highly festive attire as the dress that Guðrún made. Beside her is a woman in everyday clothes, knitted jacket with wool skirt and knitted cap called peysuföt. Then there is a woman in a cassock or a riding outfit and a small girl wearing a Þjóðbúningar. One of the men is wearing a blue knitted jacket, while the other is a sailor dressed in outfit made of skin. All of them are wearing sheepskin shoes. As previously mentioned, most travelers visited Viðey. They showed interest in the Icelandic traditional costumes and wrote about them. This drawing could very well depict the costumes of the women in Viðey that dressed up for display. Guðrún most likely met these guests and might have spoken to them. Maybe she even got new ideas that influenced her to create new fashion. Icelandic officials in the late 18th century wrote scholarly works in the spirit of the Enlightenment. These often contain valuable sources about domestic production, craftsmanship, and costumes. There is great discussion about wool and its processing, as it was the main raw material Icelanders had for clothmaking for centuries. Weaving was an important production method for the household since wool cloth was utilized for clothmaking and as an export currency. The warp-weighted loom and the spindle had been in use for centuries, but in 1750 the first textile workshop was established by the privileged Icelandic company Innréttingar, where Skúli was a chairman. New tools were imported, such as horizontal looms, spinning wheels, and other tools for artisan-based textile production. In the next decades, these new tools and techniques spread around the country, which made the wool production more efficient and varied. From the beginning of the 17th century, there was Danish monopoly trade system in Iceland that lasted until 1787. The trade was in the hand of Danish merchants and only during the summer. Catalogue with specified goods indicated what needed to be imported yearly, such as corn, timber, and iron, but also miscellaneous fabrics and finery for clothmaking. Special orders for the upper-class people were also many. Guðrún and other women of the higher society had therefore access to the fine materials and accessories they needed. Though the import was limited, it was the current production in Denmark, and therefore the Icelandic costumes followed the fashion trends to a certain extent. It is believed that knitting reached the country through German merchants in the early 16th century. Ever since it was an important and efficient textile technique, as knitted garments became the new currency in the trade with the Danes. In the year 1780, around 146,000 pairs of socks and 103,000 pairs of mittens were exported to Denmark. Sources such as estate registers reveal the importance of knitted garments as everyday clothes regardless of class and status. There we find descriptions of knitted jackets, trousers, petticoats, vests, caps, socks, mittens, and so on. Wool production was therefore significant. Every member of the household had to engage in certain work tasks, and children learned to knit at very young age. Around 1760, Skúli wrote about knitting in Viðey. There he describes how to knit a woman's jacket, men's jacket, socks, undergarments, and caps. A list of Viðey's manufactured goods from 1756 contains clothing to dye blue. Among those were 11 jackets. It is evident that everyday work demanded efficiency from the household in Viðey. Guðrún was brought up in this ambience where her skills and ambitions thrived. Despite the abundant tasks, there were moments when people were allowed to do things for leisure. After wool processing and dressmaking throughout the winter, the housewife and her maids had opportunity to embroider as the days of spring became brighter. Eggert Ólafsson, who traveled around the country between 1752 and 57, conducting research on Icelandic lifestyle, referred to women's handicrafts as arts and crafts. He mentioned that women decorated clothing and utility items and had pattern books for this purpose. Few pattern-knitted garments have been preserved, but pattern books have survived with diverse patterns for embroidery, knitting, and weaving. There is no doubt that Guðrún and the women in Viðey possessed such patterns. Two categories of sources have been of significant importance in my research on historical costumes: estate records from the beginning of the 18th century and preserved artifacts. The National Museum of Iceland preserves costumes and garments, thereof considerable number of Þjóðbúningar, which are dated to the first half of the 19th century according to the records. However, the oldest artifacts date back to the late 18th century, among them 2 skirts and a collar that Guðrún made. In 2011, I conducted research at the museum where I examined, measured, and documented around 400 artifacts of various types and sizes. I used records from estates that are preserved at the Icelandic National Archive as a reference. This allowed me to identify similar garments in both estate records and preserved artifacts. Costumes from the 18th and the 19th century were composed of the same garments, although changes in colors and style occurred according to the fashion trends of the time. It was evident that garments had been altered to reflect new trends. Preserved garments could therefore be older than indicated by records. As estate records of the 18th century reveal, there is a significant registration of knitted jackets and trousers. Similar artifacts can be found in the museum's collection, most from the 19th century. The National Museum in Denmark preserves men's outfit, jacket and trousers knitted of brown wool. It's registered 1858 as a gift from a Danish merchant that got it in Iceland in the beginning of the 19th century. It's an interesting artifact since it has the same style as a jacket described by Skúli in 1760. In recent years, I have been researching and recreating these knitted garments based on the preserved artifacts and the descriptions by Skúli. One of the garments he describes is a knitted woman's jacket considered to be the beginning of the everyday outfit peysufoot. It's not obvious how to start this intricate reconstruction with only a description, not a perfect pattern. The circular needle did not exist until the 20th century, so I had to use 50 needles, which makes sense. It's the same technique as knitting a sock, just a little bit larger, or around 800 or 2000 stitches in the beginning. The pattern is very technical and the outcome is an amazingly beautiful jacket with raglan sleeves that, by the way, history books indicate did first appear in knitting around 1900. Knitting became a very important technique for Icelanders. Everyone could learn to knit. It did not require much working space and it allowed the most talented knitters to create beautiful garments. Although everyone in the household had their duties in the wool process, the cloth making was women's work. In Viðey, Guðrún and the other women worked skillfully, producing necessities as well as creating new fashion. Hitherto, we have been looking at various sources that can define and explain some of the abundant tasks people had at the 18th century. To complete this discussion, we shall look at sources that shed light on Guðrún's personal life as an adult. Estate and auction registers reveal that she had typical everyday garments as knitted jacket and petticoat with wool, skirt and apron. She also had linen shirt and bodice, upphluttur, with attached petticoat of fine wool. She had blue wool skirt and apron, blue jacket, several scarves, 4 cassocks, hat and some jewelry. But we also know from preserved letters that when she became a widow, the district commissioner in Skagafjörður impounded her most valuable belongings as a payment for debts. That included some garments, her belt, necklace, sleeve buttons, 8 silver clasps, pair of cassock shields, and 16 pairs of cassock claps and hooks. She wrote to the governor and friend Ólafur Stephensen in Viðey to complain. She did not regret the jewelry so much, but she desperately needed her spinning wheel and other tools. In Viðey, Guðrún wrote letters to friends in Copenhagen with news from home and discussed the political situation in Europe. She writes about her miscellaneous projects in Annríki and asks them to send some embroidery silk or even silk stockings that she could reuse. In a letter from 1798 written by Guðrún's friend Ragnheiður Finnsdóttir to the bishop's widow Valgerður Jónsdóttir, she mentions the beautiful skirt and apron that Guðrún made for Valgerður. Ragnheiður, as an intermediary, intends to deliver it soon and has already paid 10 riksdaler courant. In context to the annual widow pension of 20 riksdaler, it seems to have been fairly paid. In the last letter in August 1815, Guðrún talks about being sick and lonely. The winter was cold and windy. She has no appetite nor energy to work in Annríki. Guðrún died on June 20th, 1816. It was one of her grateful students, Björg Halldórsdóttir, that created the illuminative image of Guðrún as Mother of the Flowers in a commemorative poem. Guðrún Skúladóttir lived prosperous and productive life in Viðey. As a child, she achieved education that made her one of the most talented handwork artisans at her time. After returning as a widow to Viðey, she created her most beautiful and magnificent artifacts that still exist and allows us to study and admire her great talents. She is one of the ancestors that I've become acquainted with through historical researches and even met them in their work. In this slide, you can see the result of my work, reconstruction of the 3 skirts and Þjóðbúningar made by Guðrún. As previously mentioned, I envisioned my study of history as a complement to my tailoring. Written sources are important, but they provide only limited information, which can be challenging when researching textiles and clothing. Texts do not necessarily shed a light on a piece of clothing if there is no fundamental knowledge. Preserved artifacts are neither very informative unless one has some knowledge of textile production and historical evolution. Often a piece of cloth carries a complex story that intertwines over the decades. Industry revolution, technical evolution, production methods, new fabrics and spirit of time all shapes the fashion in every period of time. Garments that should last for decades were also altered to serve new fashion. It requires expert skills to read the story and put it in context with other sources. This is something I've tried to do, but since craftsmanship is my passion, no research is complete unless I have a full understanding of the process of the production. Experiments and repetitions often require a lot of work, but the reward is to experience text come alive in a garment I have been working on. My project has been going on for 25 years and I've learned a great deal. I have recreated numerous costumes and it is magnificent to experience the intricate and spectacular flower patterns emerge stitch by stitch from the fabric. At that point, patience is all you need. Now I understand that in the 18th century there were also trendsetters creating the fashion, and that goes on through the centuries with new generations. I greatly admire the knowledge and artistic vision of the ancestors and extend my heartfelt gratitude to Guðrún Skúladóttir, Mother of the Flowers, for her generous collaboration.